This is a structure based on profit incentive, on profit motives, on revenue, on shareholder value. These are sacred institutions that have been completely corrupted. And there was infrastructure laid that builds on itself. Ideology, understanding that created this beast that we have today. And this mindset has become an acceptable construct. It has become just the way it is. But what people don't realize is that we embody the consciousness of these systems. We created these systems, whether it was through a select few or otherwise. We can reimagine, we can restructure, and we are going to, because eventually people will have to push back. It's my belief that real change takes place internally within individuals. You don't fight the system. You don't fight these constructs from the outside. You don't fight them on their terms. You usurp them. You change consciousness. You make people aware of the world around them.
In today's episode, we're taking a hard look at the truths many of us avoid about capitalism. Not the polished textbook version, but the lived reality that shapes how we see ourselves, how we value our time, and how we measure our worth. My guest today, Aaron Scott, challenges us to see the system for what it really is. Not so we can burn it all down, but so we can reclaim our power within it. We'll talk about the illusions we've been sold, the hidden beliefs that keep us tied to constant productivity, and how to start redefining success on our own terms. This isn't just a conversation about economics. It's about identity, self-worth, and the small personal revolutions that ripple outward into real change. If you started to question why your worth is tied to productivity and profit, or what might be possible if we stop chasing endless growth, this episode will push you to see things differently. I'm your host, Ryan Olekson, and this is Beyond 80%. Aaron, welcome to Beyond 80%. I'm excited to have you on the show today.
Excited to be here, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
So Beyond 80% is all about shifting our perspectives. So I'm going to kick it off with my favorite question. What is something that you have recently unlearned?
It's a really good question. I'm trying to unlearn all the time because there's so much garbage I've inherited and been indoctrinated with that continues to resurface. Something that I'll probably continue to work on for a while is my receptivity to people who are just so full of it, and I can't tolerate it. I'm really trying hard to be calm and collected, but I just want to be like, BS. Like, you're not fooling anybody.
So your bullshit meter just flies through the roof?
It's just my ability to be cool with it and pretend that for social acceptability reasons, it's fine with me. If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. I think back then I used to be the girl in the room who was friends with everyone, who could talk to everyone. And now I go into public spaces and I'm like, I just don't have the energy for this right now.
You're done performing. That's why.
I'm done performing. Absolutely. So one of the reasons that you really stuck out to me, Aaron, is because you work on Wall Street. And when we're talking about this space and we're talking about capitalism and spiritual awakenings, Wall Street doesn't really fit into that. Can you talk about your own awakening and how you got there and when you started to notice this shift that happened within yourself?
Let me answer that with maybe some clarifying points. It requires an experience with darkness to pull out awareness. My whole life, I have felt a uncomfortability with the status quo. I entered Wall Street consciously knowing that I had to sever a part of myself to compete, to perform. And in doing so, I kept chipping away at myself, making sacrifices. I found myself close to 2 decades later, and I didn't recognize myself. It had really eroded my constitution.
So you had mentioned when you were going to work on Wall Street, you knew you had to sever a part of yourself. So what did that actually look like for you?
Yeah, so it's really kind of like an orientation to everything. I think that when you're in a job where you're hyper-focused on performance, where you are structuring an identity around that performance in a really acute fashion, if you don't, you just kind of won't succeed. You're kind of jumping into a pool full of sharks, for lack of a better metaphor. And you have to really submit and sever a part of yourself, which I was consciously and probably not well battling on a daily basis. It encompassed a lot of things. Everything from deferring going to a doctor's appointment, canceling plans, not making it home for your family, getting caught up in your productivity, over worrying about trades you're making or positions that you have. It's about realigning and taking back sovereignty over your own energy. That's really what it looked like and what I was able to discern from my own personal experiences. And I was completely skewed, severing a part of myself, and it just added up. It became a way of life and an identity that just wasn't sustainable. And I could kind of like fake it. I could kind of like sacrifice myself for a decent amount of time. I did it for a couple of decades, probably longer than that, but I wasn't the type of person that could just continue to do that. It had commodified my relationships and made a lot of them based on utility. I never felt comfortable using people or exploiting people. Like, it just never made sense to me. And that, whether people want to admit it or not, or recognize it or not, is an inherent part of capitalism in its current form. This isn't some out of reach institutional idea. Capitalism, it's not just about Wall Street or corporate finance. This is how people run their small businesses. It's about increasing margin, increasing revenue. People have to live and eat and survive. But it gets to a point, I think, where the day-to-day became kind of like too much. I said to myself, I can keep going down this path, or I can jump into the void and see what's on the other side. And I chose the latter.
So was there a clear breaking point when you knew that you couldn't keep going the way that you were?
For me, there were a couple acute situations where I had a severing with my partner. My partner took a massive loss on a position, which almost collapsed the fund. On the back of that, there was tension on a restructuring. And then I was just completely ripped apart as far as what to do to save the fund, which pushed me further in. I had to accommodate terms for my existing investor so that I wouldn't lose that investor. And I was making decisions with hires or putting trust in people that I shouldn't have. But eventually it became a situation where I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't know if this is going to work. I've invested so much capital, made so many sacrifices, and the end result is not going to be optimal regardless.
So I'm trying to understand, knowing that you're different, knowing the industry that you're working in, what drove you to work in there, knowing that maybe it was about that power and that money and the focus was on profit?
Yeah, I think everybody, whether people realize it or not, most people are aware of this. We are taught early on, your worth is determined by your output, by your productivity. You go to college, you need to make sure that you are marketable when you graduate. And your degree needs to be representative of that in whatever way you can. You want to make sure that what you're studying leads you on the right path where you can make money. I was no different. I structured my consciousness around graduating and making the most amount of money that I could. It wasn't a linear path to Wall Street. I had to really push and make my way in, which everybody kind of has to do regardless of where they graduate to get to the point where I got. It's part of the framework of all of our education. This doesn't just materialize when you get to college. I don't know if people realize this, but the education system in the United States is an education that pushes for performance. It indoctrinates you to get the highest grade, to regurgitate it. If you look at the actual origin story of, certainly in the States, it was derived at the turn of the 20th century by industrial capitalists, guys like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie. They dumped 130 million or something, maybe more, literally constructing the entire education system in the United States. It was derived from the Prussian model, whose aim is to create docile workers to serve industrial needs. The important point is that people don't recognize where the model for their education system comes from. Furthermore, they don't recognize how they are impacted by that model. It's not just about consuming information and what you're learning. It's about the structure through which you're learning it and what that tells you about yourself and how you should look at yourself, right? You create a sort of performative identity, which is exactly what this model needs, because you need to look at yourself as this performing being, as this producer of utility. It produces doctrine, ideology. It's under the surface. It's a real metaphysical construct that people are not aware of. There is a lack of curiosity across the board in our population, and people need to start caring about origin stories, looking internally at slowing down and self-examining.
So how do you personally make different decisions now around time, money, or energy?
Yeah, so one of the core tenets of my worldview, if you will, is this illusion of separateness. I think that this is really the core of our disconnection. We view ourselves as separate from other people. It's the biggest problem in reimagining and restructuring our world. Because if you think about it, if that illusion faded away and we came to terms with our actual reality, what a different world we would have. It wouldn't just impact our relationships with other people, but it would impact our policy decisions, the way that employers treat employees, the way that corporate governance takes form. This is real world stuff here. If my problem is mine, then your problem is yours, then your problems are not my problems. But biologically speaking, humans are neurologically wired for connection. We have mirror neurons in our brains that we don't just observe other people, but we feel each other. When somebody smiles at us, our brain fires as if we're smiling. When we see someone cry, like part of our brain lights up as if we're experiencing the pain ourselves. This is physiology. It's called empathic resonance. There's this scientific study that's been done where when you're in deep conversation, you become more emotionally in tune. When you're close to somebody and you're sharing your grief, brainwaves, heartbeats synchronize. This is measured in couples, infants, even during rituals with groups of people. It's this whole idea that people connect to one another when they're experiencing the same thing. This isn't pseudoscience, this is actual science. This goes deeper also. The boundary between the human body and the natural world is not solid. It's hugely porous. It's alive. It's constantly changing. The human microbiome, right, is really just a vast collection of microbes that live in our bodies. This is essential to our being. Microbes come from soil, the air we breathe, the food we eat, in contact with other living beings. They co-create our actual experience. They regulate our digestion, our immune system, neurotransmitters. All of these things influence anything from mood to sleep to cognitive function.
So kind of going back, as you were talking about the education system, I don't think is talked about enough. It's actually something that I'd love to dive into because it really highlights how if you go into a regular school setting, you are indoctrinated right off the bat from kindergarten. When I think back to when I was in school, you were rewarded for acing tests because you were memorizing information and then regurgitating it. There really wasn't many opportunities, maybe aside from a couple classes or two where you had a really great teacher that would challenge you and ask you why you agree with this or do you not agree with this. But those classes were far and few between. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity to actually go internal and say, well, why do I agree with this viewpoint? And is there more to that story, especially when it comes to history? When I started to realize it's in education, healthcare, and obviously in capitalism, when did you notice this shift that our global system was focused on profit and control?
Post-World War II, there was a major shift where the United States was really able to capitalize and make themselves a global superpower in the aftermath of the war. We created so many agencies and institutions in the federal government. That was when we founded institutions like the CIA. That's when we expanded really this kind of major federal deep state blueprint. There was also a massive push into this consumerist mindset where you were patriotic if you bought a home, patriotic if you were consuming. There was a massive push in marketing. Advertising boomed in the 50s and the 60s. That was the birth of a new kind of like paradigm. Again, there was a conscious effort to push for economic growth at all costs. We made our new god capital and power. And we've been on this accelerated path down that highway, driving 200 miles an hour blindfolded, just expanding, growing.
So you're saying that there was this economic boom that happened in that time period, but give us a little bit of a view into what it looks like before that.
Okay, so if we want to talk about origin, there was a massive push post-World War II, but it was really at the time of the Industrial Revolution where we saw major shifts in what I call sacred institutions like education, government, healthcare. You saw erosion of education. And just to kind of touch on that quickly, something that's maybe lost or misunderstood, the way the universe and the world operates is not linear. The only thing linear is the charted path we're on. Everything is infinite growth, increase productivity, scalability, efficiency. I mean, these are linear constructs to govern our lives. People talk about ideas like, oh, this is just the way life is. You have to make sacrifices. Yes, these are truths, but to the extent that we have to, there are countless stories where people work ungodly amount of hours in blue collar, white collar, it doesn't matter, their entire life to retire barely. I mean, most people can't even retire now. There are power structures that have interests to propel this way of life, but this is not a one-sided story. There are people with money whose interests are to push this agenda and to keep the system in place. It's a very well-oiled machine, as we all see, but we have a role in that. There is a reciprocity there. We have to buy into it. We have to agree to it. Whether we do so unconsciously or not, we are making a conscious choice at some point. Whether we're following other people, whether we're conforming to societal norms, whether we're doing what our parents said, doesn't matter. So back to the origins. If we look at also what happened with the medical industry, there was another transformation at the time with the same industrial capitalists. These guys were wealthy beyond understanding. They had a monopoly on oil, steel, the essential commodities that we use to build infrastructure in our country. I mean, they controlled it. And they did what probably most people would do. They wielded their power, looking for influence to increase profit and ensure that what they were building would last and that they would make as much money as possible. So if we look at the medical industry before the turn of the 20th century, it was a holistic, food-based. There's record of people utilizing resonance from church bells, frequencies to heal. This was all thrown out. It was coined quackery. There was an industrialization of the medical industry. There was a propaganda agenda there, and they rolled out their new medicine program. They infiltrated medical schools with curriculum. Their methodology was an allopathic one. They constructed an entire pharmaceutical industry around petroleum-based pharmaceuticals. And it still exists today. It's the exact same model. There was a restructuring, a recalibration around medicine, around healing. We created medication to suppress symptoms, never cure anything. So this is a structure based on profit incentive, on profit motives, on revenue, on shareholder value. These are sacred institutions that have been completely corrupted. And there was infrastructure laid that builds on itself. Ideology, understanding that created this beast that we have today. And this mindset has become an acceptable construct. It has become just the way it is. But what people don't realize is that we embody the consciousness of these systems. We created these systems, whether it was through a select few or otherwise. We can reimagine, we can restructure, and we are going to, because eventually people will have to push back. A big part of my effort, and I have a book coming out in a month or two, it's my belief that real change takes place internally within individuals. You don't fight the system. You don't fight these constructs from the outside. You don't fight them on their terms. You usurp them. You change consciousness. You make people aware of the world around them. A big part of my book is about true empowerment, real sovereignty, giving people back autonomy and control. It's about the wholeness that they've lost, coming back to the internal and incorporating and respecting all aspects of human consciousness. And again, it's my core belief that it's through the internal awakening and truth and knowledge that you enact real change.
As you were talking, one thing that resonated is that we as a society have consented to all of this. We've agreed to it. We've given our power away. Is this concept of I'm the victim. I can't do this because the law says this, or because I need a job, I need to make money. While all that is true, what I'm hearing you say is that this revolution, this change has to start with people individually. Accepting responsibility is really hard, and it requires thinking. It requires curiosity. It requires challenging yourself. When we look at capitalism as a system, what are some of the hidden beliefs that taught us about who we are and what makes us valuable?
Yeah, I think that as we discussed before, these ideas transcend planes. It's the same values taught on a more subtle level in our education system. The illusion of infinite growth is the biggest cancer to this world. There's no infinite growth. If you look at the way nature works, you don't take down the rainforest and then trees pop right back up for you to cut them down again. Our consciousness, our awareness is pushed to the external. In doing so, we don't look internally. We ignore things like curiosity or interest in understanding because we're so stressed and anxious. We're so hypnotized by what our sensory faculties can pick up that we've disconnected ourselves from our internal, from our sacred design. This is the output of capitalism. It's not neutral. It tells us how to live our life. I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist. I believe that individuals should determine their destiny. I believe in the ideals of the Constitution. I believe that capitalism in its current form is inherently flawed. There are ways to reimagine capitalism, ways to make it so that it honors people who aren't focusing on profit all the time. Like there should be things like universal standards of living, affordable healthcare. These are not complex discussions when we have a $36 trillion deficit with nothing to show from it. And it's the victimhood mentality is a byproduct of this current paradigm. Why wouldn't it be? You feel so lost, weak. You don't know what to do. You don't know what levers to pull. But again, it's about a recalibration and a reintegration with yourself. It's about understanding first and foremost that you are not an object and you are not just your output.
So let's break this down. I think it's something that people hear all the time. I can't go into work and say, I only want to work 6 hours today because I feel like it. In the paradigm we're working now, we have to sacrifice a piece of ourselves, or that's the thought. But what would it look like if we didn't have to do that and we didn't measure our success or our value against how much money we make?
So this isn't like a quick fix. This is something that will evolve over time, that will build on itself. But step one takes place with the individual. You're not here to dismantle every system, burn down every institution. Your job is to see clearly, to recognize with open eyes what's been distorted, not with anger or hostility, but with acceptance, a rootedness, and to see that you are separate from this identity that you've created. It's about reclaiming your natural rhythm and balance. It's also about what's possible. It's about understanding in completeness who you truly are.
Can you give us an example? Just so it's a little bit more tangible.
So everything in the universe exists in a natural order. Ancient civilizations have called it the sacred order. It operates using sacred constructs like balance, reciprocity. Let's look at how the formation of our DNA mirrors these constructs. We are embedded within a greater ecosystem. We are not separate from nature. We are nature experiencing itself in our unique form. This is an empowering realization because it reframes identity. It makes you realize that you are not a product of a system. You are part of something greater. We have created a synthetic overlay that overrides this divine program. We do it to satiate our appetites for ambition. The people that are in power who have the money utilize this. They're feeding their greed, they're feeding their need for power, they're feeding their need for survival, their ego. People have cut themselves off from the sacred, from the divine. There's what I call an illusion of separateness. People think they are separate from other people, from the world around them. This is a massive illusion. We are all connected. I'm trying to bring the practical reality of life to the forefront of awareness. This is living in literal reality. The world we've created is not the real world. It is a delusion to operate the consciousness that we occupy. Re-understanding yourself, repositioning yourself in reality, and understanding that we are not separate. And if we can see who we truly are, we don't give all of our power to man-made systems. People will start seeking more.
Yeah.
I want to get a little bit more practical. So what does this look like in our education systems? Our education system begins to reclaim wonder. Children aren't taught to memorize and obey. They're taught to question. They're encouraged to feel, to imagine, to experience with their senses, to be creative. Learning is a liberating experience. It's not preparation for obedience. We frame economic systems around sufficiency. Wealth isn't hoarded the way it is now. Resources are shared. Time and care and rest are honored. Endless growth doesn't take place. Medical systems are restructured where the body isn't seen as a malfunctioning machine that we have to repair, and healing becomes holistic again. We treat food as medicine. We are honored as intelligent beings, multidimensional beings, where people aren't looking at economic systems, which is the most pervasive in this paradigm.
When I really drill these things down, I would say 90% of this is about the money piece. How do we get to a place where money does not have so much power over people, because that is so ingrained in everything that we do? Realistically, do you see a world in the future where that can even be possible? Or do you think that these systems have to come crashing down and we need to build them from the ground up again?
We do not need to dismantle infrastructure. We need to recalibrate it. We worship money as God, and we're forced to worship it. It's what we focus on for the majority of our day. We work the majority of our life to accumulate it. We are consciously focused on it. This is what real worship is. We have institutions that glorify it. We have institutions like the Federal Reserve Bank that has a infinite inflation growth rate. Why do we have to grow at all every year? Why do we have to have inflation? Why are we on an infinite path of growth, which, by the way, is counter to Earth? There aren't endless resources. So why do we have an endless growth rate? It never ends. Well, because people with assets and capital are the ones who benefit. Financial institutions benefit because they hold the assets. And as inflation keeps going, their assets go up in value. So it's very simple what's going on. When the holders of capital are not put into check by government, when government is corrupt across both party lines, this is like the illusion of partisanship. We need government that acts as steward, that has true care and interest in mind, that is not corrupted. Even the people who have control and money have fallen victim to this ideological skew, this misunderstanding of themselves, where we are units. Everything is gridded, everything is in a matrix. We are viewed as output, revenue, cost, time, measurement. This is how we are viewed in the industrial capitalist model. And because we are viewed that way by a system, it's how we view ourselves. We have to contort ourselves to accommodate it. So just take a step back and look at how we've shaped our lives. Our lives are the byproducts of these ideological constructs.
So would you say the biggest lie that the system has taught people is that their value and worth is solely tied to their productivity?
100%. You shouldn't be looked at as a product. You shouldn't be objectified. We objectify everything. When you look at yourself as an object, when everything is to satiate your physical body, this is how it manifests in this world, in this paradigm.
So we've spent some time talking about this paradigm and the historical aspects of it. I want to switch gears and bring it down to the individual level. So I'd love for us to take this example, and I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I'm thinking about a single mom working 3 jobs, right? She can't wait for the institution to change and make things better for her. And if she were to listen to this podcast, I could see her kind of scoff and be like, that sounds glorious, but I have to conform to the institution or the system. And I can't just stop and say, well, this doesn't work for me anymore. So she continues back to that point of, well, that's life, that mentality. I can see how that can be extremely hard. If someone were to listen to this, what can they do at an individual level until these institutions start to shift in this direction?
They can start reimagining who they are. They can start taking back power from the institutions. Yes, they are forced to work an insane amount to make a small amount of money, but they need to find space for themselves. They need to relax. They need to engage in, again, like self-healing practices so that they aren't thrown into this machine, stripped of everything.
So you've said that step 1 is realizing this illusion that we've talked about. Well, after someone sees it, what can they actually do now about it?
The first step is kind of awakening, seeing the world for what it is, seeing yourself for who you are. It's one thing to see it and to understand it intellectually, and it's another thing to awaken fully and embody it. Baseline first step is to return to presence. Be present, do breath work, sit there, feel your body, but to be present and feel yourself. I think meditation is a great technique. Another great way to sever this illusion is to do things selflessly, to volunteer, to help people without expected compensation. In doing so, you reorient to people around you because you transcend this illusion. Service, in my opinion, collapses the divide between the giver and the receiver. And it makes sense because you're aligning your soul or your sacred power with somebody else. A big one for me is loosening your grip with your ego. It's thinking about what are your emotional triggers? When do you feel defensive? Journaling is a great way to do that because you're taking these emotions or thoughts that are dictating your behavior and you're putting it on paper and you're staring at it. Let's say something happened in your life where you're getting completely pulled and pushed by it. Putting it down, it's almost like you're taking it out of you and you're putting it in front of you, diffusing its power, and you're confronting it. To take it back on a more cerebral level, I think it's important for people to have curiosity and to study how interconnected systems work, whether it's on a biological basis, on a economic basis, on a social level. And they need to be conscious of where they're putting their energy, of how they are unwinding. It goes across everything. It's about realizing that they're not just a cog in a wheel, and it's about reordering your life accordingly. They don't happen overnight, but you have to start with people seeing themselves for who they are, seeing the world for what it is, and understanding with complete awareness their place in reality. When you do that, people will care about each other in a different way. People will look at each other in a different way. You will look at yourself in a different way.
Yeah. So with everything that we've touched on today and where we're at in our country and our global state, what truth about capitalism do you think people are finally ready to hear?
It's a fractured system. And what you're experiencing individually, many others are experiencing across social levels. They're dealing with their own psychological, emotional, financial, relational problems as a result of it, as a result of praying at the altar of capitalism. It's not a sustainable construct, and it will not be operating in its current form in the future. It's about how we reform it and the tools we give it to allow for that reformation. If we don't provide humanity with complete truth and understanding, then we can't reform. It starts with truth, knowledge, understanding, and then a perspective shift. That's how change happens.
When we're talking about this truth of capitalism and what we all need to understand, one thing I constantly see in my own social circles, even on social media, is this blaming of billionaires, pointing fingers. They're the problem. They have more than enough money to feed everyone, to fix all the problems. Do you think that's true? And is there any responsibility that us non-billionaires need to take a hard look at and accept?
Look, I think that, first of all, the reform that has to take place with our government. The way that we dole out money, where we think we should be spending money. This is where the money can be repurposed. This is where we can build regenerative systems and regenerative economies. The billionaires have excelled in this structure. They have figured out ways to excel in the structure, to capitalize on the infrastructure. They are a victim in other ways. They are under the same illusions and delusions. But there are billionaires who are aware of the stuff I'm saying. There are people who have deep metaphysical understanding of the way the universe works or the way the world works. There are many, some who aren't billionaires, who are part of the problem. When you bucket anything from a billionaire to a millionaire to a group of people, it's not the right approach. Billionaires certainly need to do more than what they're doing. They need to be taxed differently than they are. They have a greater sense of social responsibility. But if you're a billionaire and you believe in the illusion of separation, why would you care? Well, if you're operating under the same delusions, why would you do otherwise?
Who makes the billionaires? So Jeff Bezos became a billionaire because the rest of us purchase from Amazon every single day. We consume and buy into it. And what I think is hilarious is now we're sitting back and pointing fingers at Jeff Bezos like, why aren't you doing something? You're greedy. You're all about money, but we are all the ones that made him.
This is a big realization because people don't realize that. This goes back to what I talked about with respect to the give and take relationship. You don't get to complain about somebody or a system if you're feeding into it. You don't get to say, this guy's the worst, and then support his company. If you don't agree with a food company dumping chemicals into products, if you don't agree with those processes, do not support them with your wallet. Do not buy products that are damaging. Buy organic produce, buy non-GMO foods. It's better for you across every part of your being, and you're not supporting a infrastructure and a system that is rewarded by ignorant consumption. You have to put your money where your mouth is. People have to start caring. The idea of reaching out to your state legislature, to your councilman in your town should be standard protocol. You should care what your school board is doing. You should care about proposals. This should be part of your common dialogue. If you see something that you don't like is going on, call up a friend, a like-minded friend, write a letter to your senator. We need people to care, to detach from solely worrying about money. It's not just about the external world. Issues matter. Ideological issues matter. People have to re-engage with that curiosity, with that involvement. Things will change. Bring it into their consciousness. These are not neutral constructs, and they have to be guided by the citizens, what the Constitution says.
If someone listening could take away one thing from our conversation, what would you want it to be?
Their existence, their understanding of themselves, their understanding of their place in this world is far greater, far more beautiful, far more empowering than they think it is. And that it's through awareness, through looking at the void and stepping into it and saying there's got to be another way, and stepping into it and embracing it and seeing what's on the other side. Because this way of life, it ain't working. Don't ask me. Ask that person asking the question.
Well said. Aaron, what's next for you? I know you have a book coming out. Can you give listeners an idea of the different topics that you hit on and even some concepts that you dive a little deeper into?
Absolutely. The book is titled The Fifth Evolution, but it's not just about giving people information. The book is sort of consciously structured. And in my book, I go a lot deeper. I give a framework, explain like the veil, the illusions, the systems, what happens when you realize it. And then I offer a roadmap to living consciously, to living whole, to living with a complete sense of yourself, who you are, where you fit, what the world around you is. And then a kind of integration into the world and what that means, how empowering that is. I'm also involved with an alternative therapeutics company focusing on unmet needs through like real, all natural, holistic ways that are in symbiosis with our natural world, treating pain and other unmet needs.
That's a lot going on. That's exciting. Congratulations. Aaron, thank you so much for joining Beyond 80% today. You've given me, and I'm sure all of us, a lot to think about and dive into further. Can't thank you enough for joining us, and we'll be keeping an eye out for your book.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for having me. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate the time.
To learn more about Aaron's work and his book, check out the links in the show notes below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode and further topics we can explore on this podcast together. So leave a comment below or reach out via email at beyond80%@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss an opportunity to think, question, and evolve. I'm your host, Ryan Olekson, and this is Beyond 80%.